welcome to the CrackOn podcast, hosted by me, John Saunders. Crack on! Hey guys, hope you're well. So, welcome to Series 2, Episode 10 of the CrackOn podcast. And I am filming from my camper van, which is a surreal place to be doing it. But it is with great pleasure to introduce Dan Stanley, personal and professional performance coach, founder of Men and Mountains, an all-round inspiring guy, army background. So I really think you're going to enjoy this. It's a thoroughly enjoyable. I loved it. So, and without further ado, crack on. Afternoon, Dan. How are we doing, mate? You good?
Hey, John. Yeah, I'm really good. The sun is shining in South Wales, and I'm feeling good.
Yeah, good, mate. You look well, mate. You look well. So let's get straight into it. Right. So first off, what does crack on mean to you?
Obviously, you sent these questions through in advance, John, and when I opened the message, I was kind of like, wow, these are some big questions. And, historically, I would have kind of tried to give really sort of clever and intelligent answers, but I decided just to shoot from the hip today and just let my intuition guide the way. So I think cracking on for me, there's almost two sides to it, but the first side is very much about having an attitude towards life, having a mindset that is resilient and robust, and that really signifies that when you are faced with adversity, that you find ways to either move past it or move through it, but you still make progress. The second side, I think, to cracking on, and this is particularly important because of the line of work that I do, really in regards to the fact that sometimes people are too stubborn to stop. You know, even though they're trying to crack on, if by cracking on means that they're heading in the wrong direction, actually, you know, there's probably some kind of reason why they're being so driven and so purposeful. But, you know, people talk about, I suppose, success leaving clues. And in my mindset, so does failure. So kind of when I first saw that question, I was like, oof, this could be a contentious issue for John, because I know that he loves cracking on. But but just for clarity, you know, I'm a big believer in being progressive, being resilient, being robust. And actually, with one of the kind of community projects that I'm involved in, it's called Men and Mountains. You know, we kind of have a saying that it's bag on, boots on, crack on. And that kind of signifies, you know, after we've stopped for a little bit of a breather, and we still got another mountain to climb or another hill to get to the top of, you know, somebody will shout boots on, bag on, crack on, and off we'll all go. So yeah.
There's a part, I mean, from that though, there's a part, what I got from that, mate, was there's a part for cracking on at a particular time. And I think you're right in what you said to begin with. Ultimately, you can crack on in the right direction, and actually the redirection is harder than potentially, you know, coming off the train track and stopping is a valuable practice.
Yeah, I see that a lot now, particularly in kind of business owners and business leaders. There's kind of they kind of focus all the time, their effort and energy and all the resources on kind of getting to that finish line of success, and with an expectation that when they get there, they'll be rewarded with all these other kind of, you know, fulfillment and happiness, these softer kind of skills and feelings. But the reality is, if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, or that your success is coming at a real significant consequences, then, you know, slowing down, reframing your perspective. And sometimes you don't have to stop. You just have to make a minor course correction, and then everything in front of you opens up.
Yeah, the analogy that I use for that one is if you go from LA to New York, and at the beginning of your journey you divert by 5 degrees, you'll end up in Nova Scotia. But actually, it's that change of direction at the earliest point, isn't it? So I love that, mate. I love that. Right, second question for me. So idols, going on, you know. Have you got an idol, someone you really respect and look up to, and why? What is it within that person or people that you really respect?
I don't want this to sound egotistical, but I wouldn't say I have an idol as such. There's been people throughout the course of my life that have been role models, that have been mentors, that have influenced me greatly. But to kind of put them on the pedestal of being an idol, I don't think I could go quite to that point. You know, in my early career in the military, there was kind of a couple of really significant guys that stood out. The first was kind of he was a difficult character. In the military, you're essentially promoted on ability, and if you're not able, you get left behind. And this guy was very capable, but he was also very abrasive, and he used to rub people the wrong way. Right. So he was often overlooked for promotion. And by the time, he'd been in the military by this point, maybe 12, 14 years, he should have been a certain rank, and it hadn't happened. And then kind of he had a little bit of a switch must have flicked in his mind, a penny might have dropped. And all of a sudden he realized that if he carried on being so abrasive, ultimately, when he got to his end point, his career wouldn't have been as successful, as lucrative as it might have been. So this guy decided to change his tune. And as a young soldier, he took me to one side. And he identified probably in me that I had the ability to be kind of a blue-eyed boy in the, kind of, squeaky clean, do a good job, be well respected and well thought of. But he also saw me that I had the ability to be a green-eyed boy. And when he spoke to me about these two, I didn't know what a green-eyed boy was. And he just basically, he gave me a book, and it was about, I think it was free power in the Falklands. And as they were fighting the enemy, they were taking trophies of war. They were cutting the ears of dead Argentinians. Wow. And the book was called Green-Eyed Boys. And what this guy, Ivan, his name was, he was Northern Irish. What Ivan was implying is that I had the ability to be a blue-eyed boy or a green-eyed boy, but kind of sitting in between just wasn't going to work for me. Right. And, I think I probably, in elements of my life, I've been a green-eyed boy, probably because I've had to be. And probably we'll come onto those parts in a moment where, I've had an element of ruthlessness about me, about sheer stubbornness and determination, where I've cracked on in that sense. Yeah. And in other areas, I've chosen to be a blue-eyed boy and recognize that, the more that I give to others, the more that I will get back in return. Yeah. And I know the military.
So, I mean, those moments in your life with that gentleman or that person within your life, how impactful was that for the rest of your life? Those sort of lessons learned then?
It gave me a lens to look at life, which I'd never knew existed. Yeah. A lot of my early years in my military career was about wanting to be seen to be a certain sort of way. If I'm being quite frank here, I used to be quite fearful of rejection and failure. So I'd only put myself in situations where I knew I could perform well and get a good outcome, which was kind of, at the time, that's where I was at. And, I'm not shameful or embarrassed by that anymore. But at the time, if I felt I could fail, then I would play safe and go in a direction somewhere where I'd perform well. And what Ivan did through giving me that lens was that actually, sometimes just get the job done. It doesn't matter how you do it, just get the job done. Right. And I kind of after him, there's a guy there's a Scottish guy, kind of that stoic Scottishness. What he told me was quite simply that no matter what you do, always add value. Yeah. And that's been kind of a life. Yeah, that's been kind of a life lesson for probably, since my early to mid 20s. And this is a guy that I still keep in touch with. If I have any kind of, concerns or things that I kind of need just to be sense checked, I'll pick up the phone or I'll send him a message. And I know that I'm going to get an unbiased, impartial opinion. And I really respect both of those men.
Yeah. And I think what's really great about that, and I think we all need, and again, this is maybe my opinion coming into this, but we all need those people that will just tell us straight. And ultimately, as a coach that you do now, I mean, obviously people need that in their lives, and some people haven't got that, have they? And that's, but when you have got those people, like I've got the same, I've got a few friends, I know if I've got a crazy idea, if I pass it by them and they just tell me, don't bother, I know it's too far out there, but you've got to have those people in your life, mate, haven't you?
Yeah. And I have those as well. And the security that gives me, it kind of gives me the sense of this, I suppose, this intrinsic sense of being safe in the knowledge that I will never perhaps deviate too far from the path that I set for myself. Yeah. But interestingly, I was coming into this with, kind of, I suppose, just reflecting on the questions you sent across. And, post-military, because I realized I kind of had a little think about this, and I kind of got to the point where post-military, I didn't really recognize anybody as a role model, as a mentor particularly. And then I realized that the person I wake up to every morning is actually somebody that's really significant to me. Yeah. my wife, you know, she's a business leader, and, you know, just kind of being part of and witnessing her journey and what she's done. She's somebody that I have a great deal of respect for, and, you know, kind of never been necessarily taught to lead, been taught herself organically, had a few trusted advisors around her as well, but kind of seeing just how she stepped up particularly in lockdown one, that first stage of the pandemic, you know, 60% of her business revenue was gone kind of almost overnight. And, you know, the anxiety was there, the fear was there, but it was also a stubborn sense of determination. And, you know, seeing the way that kind of she took hold of the team, kind of led from the front. And by that, what I mean is that, you know, she let down some of her own barriers and some of her own guards, and you know, made herself a kind of, you know, Brene Brown in a way, you know, made herself vulnerable, but in a way really illustrated courage. So kind of they're probably the three people that I'd say that have been impactful in my life.
Yeah, they're awesome, mate. They're awesome, and obviously I know your wife well, and I think from an outsider looking in, awesome business, awesome person, and inspiring as well. And I think I can totally understand and totally, I just totally am in awe of that as well. So I could totally buy that. That's brilliant, mate. That's brilliant. Right, let's go. We mentioned the military. You know, I said earlier on that I've got some military within me. It really intrigues me, your story. Let's go back as far as you want to go back. You know, talk us all about where Dan comes from and where it all started, mate.
Oh, okay. So kind of one of my personal values is around transparency. I think there's a lot of people out there that wear masks. They protect their vulnerabilities and their ego because they assume that to be successful, you have to be a certain way. And I'm not one of those. So, you know, probably parts of my story today that most people wouldn't feel comfortable kind of talking about, but you know, I think it's important because part of what I do in my work with my clients is to create a space where they feel safe to explore the thoughts and the feelings, and to kind of communicate and express themselves without being judged. So I'm going to go back as far as my dad not being in my life.
Okay.
At a very early stage. So my mum and dad separated when I was young.
And where was that? Where were you brought up?
So I was brought up in the Northwest. I know that South Wales is a hotbed of rugby union, but I was brought up in Widnes, which is you know,
rugby league world.
Yeah, a rugby league, but we had some Welsh some Welshmen setting the standard. You know, John Davis, John Devereaux.
All went up there. Jiffy and the boys, they all went up north.
Yeah. So I remember being a ball boy actually at Norton Park when Jiffy was playing. So yeah.
Awesome. But, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And with my dad not being in my life, I didn't realize it until, you know, I didn't connect the dots until sort of 30 years later. But, you know, I kind of alluded it to it early in my military career that most of that time was spent kind of being fearful of rejection and judgment. You know, probably part of me felt as though that I wasn't good enough because my dad wasn't in my life. And what that meant was that, you know, I would be kind of a bit of a people pleaser, if I'm honest. I would say and do things that would perhaps compromise my own values to further other people. And, you know, that carried with me through, you know, quite a few years of my life. And it was only really in kind of December 2016 when my daughter was born that I experienced what I would call kind of personal adversity. In the military, there was loads of adversity, and probably, quite frankly, a lot of it was self-induced. But
I know I want to know more about that, but we'll go further. Carry on.
Yeah. So 2016, and both me and my wife were fairly strong-headed, kind of in a way, you know, expecting life to be linear. We were, you know, kind of 29 and 33 at the time, and quite frankly, the wheels came off our relationship and marriage very, very quickly after the birth of our daughter. And if I'm being frank, you know, most of that was my fault. I had these thoughts and these feelings that I wasn't, you know, expressing. I wasn't going out to those people that I mentioned earlier as mentors. I was kind of very insular, and you know, no one would have known this, John. You know, I was kind of become a bit of an expert at kind of wearing masks, keeping people happy, you know, putting a bit of a show on. But behind it, it was all a facade. You know, and I go as far as saying that I spent probably the first 35 years of my life pretending to be somebody that I wasn't. And you know, bringing a child into the world kind of has this capacity to kind of, either set you on a new path or on a path of self-destruction. And unfortunately, I self-destructed.
Yeah.
Actually ended up, me and my wife, we separated for a period of time.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult. We were kind of both in, I suppose, a state of victim mentality, both blaming each other for how the situation had arisen.
Yeah.
And kind of, I'll go on to how we kind of, got past that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a moment where I cracked on in the wrong direction.
Right.
A lot
that
of
was a realization. I mean, you must have had a time where you realized that.
Yeah, that kind of, well, that happened on Christmas Day, 2017. A friend of mine, she still is and was at that point in time quite spiritual. She was into kind of Reiki healing and kind of, she had a real kind of respect of spirituality. And coming from a military background and having spent most of the last year with my head up my arse, I wasn't interested in reading the book that she gave me.
Yeah.
But on Christmas Day, kind of FaceTiming my daughter and seeing the sadness and pain in my wife's eyes and feeling it in my own heart, kind of, I went for a run down the Gower. Probably ran my dog and myself probably a little bit too far, but came back and opened a bottle of red. Went down really easy, and the reason I was on my own on Christmas Day was, quite frankly, I kind of, I suppose, lied to lots of groups of people because they didn't want me to spend Christmas Day on my own. And all my family were back up north in Widnes, and I chose to stay in Wales to be close to my daughter. So I must have had 4 or 5 invitations from other families to spend Christmas Day with them. And I just didn't have the heart to be in, a happy, kind of energized environment. But long story short, I came back from my run on Christmas Day. I did a bottle of red, probably far too fast, but then opened a second and, kind of in a semi-drunken state, opened this book. And the book was called Untethered Soul.
Right.
And within the first 50 pages, I became aware of something that I'd never knew even existed. And that was kind of the voice in your head, that constant critic, that inner kind of complex voice that's always questioning who you are, what you're doing, is it good enough, what will people think? And within the first,
on your shoulder, huh?
Yeah, that's it. And within 50 pages, kind of realized that, I could turn the volume down. I couldn't turn it off, but I could turn the volume down. I could choose to focus on other things. And kind of that's what's happened. That was probably the moment that my life really changed trajectory.
That's awesome. What a great, I mean, that in itself is powerful, isn't it? I mean, also being as honest as you are, I think that's awesome as well, because I think between us, we both know, and part and parcel of what you do now with the, men and the personal professional coaching you do is about men being able to talk that way. And I find that really refreshing. And I talk about losing 29 quite often because it hurt me. But the more we talk about these things, I think the more people will respond to that. I think that's awesome, Dan.
Yeah, one of my beliefs is that the more vulnerable that men are, the more courageous they are, and the more that we can normalize this kind of this misplaced stoic attitude. And that's what was that
like? What was that like in the military then? Taking it from back to where those days were, where you are now in those realizations. How much did that bottle up in the army? Because it's an environment where men are men, aren't they? And these sort of mental issues that people got, I can see you got your first aid and mental health now, those sort of areas, it must be such an environment where, do you think, is it tucked up quite a bit?
I think there is a shift starting to happen in the military mindset. I think generally speaking, in the military as a whole is starting to recognize that they have a duty of care. When somebody's sacrificed probably a substantial amounts of their life and their years to serve their country, that when these people leave, there's a duty of care and almost a moral sense of responsibility to look after these guys. But that starts, all the way back on day one, week one, when somebody joins the military, creating this cultural environment where people feel okay and safe to express themselves without, being told to man up or stop being a pussy or to grow a set.
Which is like you said a bit archaic. It's institutionalized, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not just in the military, John. From my perspective, it's in society as well.
I agree.
There's probably very little difference, truth been told, between a military environment and that of a rugby club or of a sporting club. These people they're in each other's pockets. They all think that they know each other, but they only know what the other person's shown them. For the first kind of 9 years of my military career, I was kind of army focused.
Yeah.
And then the last 3 years, I moved across to working with the Royal Marines. And, that was a really interesting journey.
What was the shift like? I mean, obviously, going from that to that, you see the Commando as being the elite of the services. Was it quite a big shift between those two?
It was a huge shift, John.
Was it? Yeah, I'm interested in that. In what way?
It was a real step change. I'd spent the previous 9 months on a promotional course.
Right.
That was kind of, it was really intense. There's 10 people on this course. Whoever got the top spot essentially would get to choose the posting. Everybody else would be kind of sent, across the globe wherever they were needed.
Right.
And, I made a lot of sacrifices in those 9 months. Most of them weren't even conscious sacrifices. I just really battened down the hatches and kind of set my mind on, taking that top spot. And, when the course finished, I was the student was the phrase. I was top student, which meant I got to pick where I was going next.
Oh, wow. Brilliant.
Yeah. And, knowing what I know now, probably my mind would have probably put a few obstacles in the way at that time of stepping into Free Commando Brigade. But it was just a complete cultural shock. I thought that I was a good soldier in the army. I've been promoted ahead of my peers. I was good at what I did. I was well respected. And then all of a sudden, I'd gone from being a big fish in a small pond to a very small fish in an ocean.
Yeah.
And just the level of consistency that these guys operated at.
Yeah.
You probably remember the old advert, 99.9% need not apply.
Yeah.
And it was true, because the role that I chose to take over was essentially sitting as kind of a liaison and a training provider between the Army and the Marines. And it's called the All Arms Commando course. And before the Army will let people go to Lympstone and to try to earn the Green Beret, the old mentality was that they were vetted. The Army didn't want to be embarrassed by sending a lot of peace soldiers to Lympstone to have, a very few pass. And also on the other side, Lympstone didn't want to have all these people from the Army turning up and, passing easily, because that would say, what would that say about being an all arms commando?
Yeah.
So my remit essentially was to redesign the way all arms commando training was run. And, I turned up into a commando culture and a commando environment wearing a blue beret. So, I was there to essentially rewrite the training manual and to reinvent the wheel in many respects. So you can imagine I wasn't particularly welcome.
I bet you were, mate. I bet you were.
It's probably quite topical now. This Super League that's been talked about, and people are talking about, Abramovich and the Glaziers and stuff. And kind of, I was probably the same kind of, that's probably how people looked at me then.
Yeah, cool.
Who's this young sergeant that's come in is going to, tell us that what we've been doing for the last 20 years is wrong.
Yeah.
So long story short, I earned my own Green Beret, which meant I was part of the Brotherhood, and that gave me a little bit of all I'd done was pass the course and tick the box and earn a beret, but I hadn't proved myself. So I came back to the unit, and historically, kind of the pass rate from people that the Army had sent to Lympstone was kind of somewhere between sort of 30 and 40% pass rate.
Right.
And the first course that I put through was kind of high 60s. So straight away, my approach got people's attention.
Yeah.
They wanted to understand what I'd done differently. And, I'll kind of just give you an overview of this, because I don't want to embarrass some of the personalities that were resistant to what I was doing and how I changed things. But the biggest change was that, that I kind of replaced the people that were in my command whose attitudes were very much about shouting and about, physical punishment, replaced them with people that were prepared to coach and collaborate with the guys that wanted to earn a Green Beret, and I was very much with the mindset that basically that they would deselect themselves throughout the process. I owned them essentially for 12 weeks.
Yeah.
There was milestones along that way, and just due to the adversity of the course, lack of sleep, physical exercise, mental and physical robustness. If they had any failings in their character or their personality, or they were, physically unable to compete and keep pace with the course, they would just come off themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of, it was a real highlight of my career, been in that role for pretty much 3 years, redesigning the way that the training was delivered and creating essentially a new culture.
Yeah, I know, mate, and in an institution like that, I've had empathy over how hard that is, because obviously you said relative to the business world, there's a lot of people in business that will have to do the same thing. They'll come into an institutional culture that they'll have to change. Can I ask you one question within that? That must have been a tough environment for one to go into. What mindset did you have going in? Obviously you had to, what's the biggest learning from that? Because you must have had a set sort of mindset to come in and out of that.
Because I'd just gone through the training that was been delivered, I knew in my head and probably in my heart, John, that kind of, there was lots of good quality guys that are coming through training. And let's just say, we're going back now over 10 years and the military has changed. But if you were ginger, you'd be probably picked out. If you had a big nose like I've got, you'd definitely take some stick.
If you've got ears like me, you definitely have it. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah,
the smallest thing that meant that you stood out from the majority of the other kind of aspiring all arms commandos meant that you would be in for some stick, and that would probably mean that you'd be doing extra physical activities. You get special treatment, and I kind of just felt there's a real sense of injustice in that, because there was really good quality guys that came through on my course when I was going through that they should have earned a green beret. Right. They had the qualities to uphold the ethos of the Royal Marines and the All Arms Commandos. But because somebody didn't like them, or somebody didn't like something about them, they just gave them unnecessary attention. And then when I came back, the training team that took me through, some of them were leaving, some of them I just got rid of because I knew that I couldn't do what I wanted to do with these people around me. So to answer your question, John, the first thing that I realized was that there was a better way of doing it. There was a need to have the right people around me and to create a shared vision. And when I did that, delivering the training was really easy. It was a case of inviting people into a space where they knew that, we wanted them to get through. We wanted them to earn a green beret. We were on their side, but to do the things that they wanted and to become one of us, they had to step up to our standard. We weren't going to go down to theirs.
No. So they just on that note then for the listeners, so people that are sat there within business and within that world, and they've got those challenges of going back after COVID, they've got all these ideas to try and change their people and business and culture. What would you advise people for that person? I know it's not a one-word answer, but what would be the first thing or what the main thing you would get them to concentrate on? You said about the clear vision. Is that something that has to be, how important is a clear vision?
The first thing to do, John, is to recognize something's not working.
Right.
And once you've done that, one of the things I do very early on with my clients is I call it creating capacity. Yeah. And that's not just in a physical sense, it's also in a mental sense. You need to be able to step back and to look at kind of, if it's not working, what do you want to work instead? Yeah. And then kind of, it doesn't have to be a definitive, outcome, but there has to be a direction, has to be a trajectory that you want to take people on. Okay. And you've got to be able to communicate that to people. And there's kind of multiple facets in that communication, but at the center of it is having the courage to be disliked. Yeah. If people are so caught up on wanting to say the right things, to do the right things, to stroke people's egos, to kind of appease people that aren't going in that direction, having the courage to either call people out or call them forward. And
so what do you mean by calling? Talk through that. What does calling forward mean? Calling out, I understand. Calling forward, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, when I look at influence, for me, a key part of influence is inviting somebody into a space where, through your thoughts and through your actions and through your words, you invite them to think, feel, or do something that they might not have done without your influence. Right. And if you're gonna, let's just say in a business context, somebody always turns up late for a meeting. You might challenge them. You might say, like, what's going on? Why are you never on time for one of our meetings? Yeah. And that might seem like a bit of a challenge, but calling people forward might be, in our next meeting, I'm going to ask that everyone turns up 5 minutes before. What I've noticed is that some people are starting to, to slip on the timings, and, our values represent that we're going to have integrity. So my integrity is inviting people to turn up 5 minutes before. And what I'd ask from you in return is that you have the integrity to do that. Yeah. So that's a challenge versus a calling forward.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great way of doing it as well. And one of my past podcasts with actually, funny enough, Jess Morgan, was about actually people being late to a meeting. And actually the way her mindset to that was, you don't respect my time enough because you're late to my meeting. And it's a really interesting mindset, isn't it? And I love that calling forward. I think that's a great way of doing it.
But what we see is that if people don't have the courage to be disliked, and there's this real necessity to perhaps conform, is that they end up carrying what I call mental pebbles.
Yes.
They might not be kind of really significant moments, but anything where an expectation hasn't been met and you feel a sense of frustration, or there's kind of just something that's kind of bugging you, or just doesn't feel right. If you keep putting those in your back pocket, these pebbles turn into boulders, these boulders turn into almost like huge rocks in your life, and then chipping away at them and getting past them is really difficult. So having the courage to be disliked is probably where people need to start.
Yeah, I really like that. I literally just had an hour's conversation with a guy about the fact that I'm accepting now that people don't like me. And it's interesting to actually, look, you've got to have your people that dislike, but you've also got to accept that, Dan, haven't you?
Yep. And that's kind of one of the key things I learned through that kind of step change going into the Marines.
Yeah.
That, almost my reputation preceded me, that I was young, that I was ambitious, that I wore the wrong color beret and that it was blue, and that I was going to step into this position where I was going to be the kind of pulling the strings and redesigning something that lots of people thought wasn't broken. I kind of stepping into that space. I learned that that if you don't stand for who you are, essentially people will push their values onto you, and before you know it, you'll have diluted your sense of self, and a year, 2 years, 3 years might have gone past, and all of a sudden to be kind of this kind of life quake, or this moment where there's a real sense of adversity, and then all of a sudden there's a real quote, actually, John, I'll share this with you and your audience. It's the quote is this: that adversity introduces a man to himself. Adversity introduces a man to himself. And it's kind of like when one of those life quakes happens, whether it's, maybe a business failing, whether it's, a marriage going through divorce, a bereavement in the family, whatever it might be, at that moment, all the kind of, I was going to swear that I won't, all the kind of things that you've been.
You can do it, mate. It's fine. This isn't for kids. It's fine.
All the shit you've been carrying around in your life, all of a sudden comes to the surface.
Yeah.
And, when it comes to the surface, it does so perhaps in an uncontrolled way. And that's when then people have these real kind of, they either choose to change their careers, they choose to kind of push it all back down. And that's where I believe depression comes from. When you depress how you're thinking and feeling and try to crack on in a negative sense, all you're doing is pushing all that stuff back inside yourself, and all those feelings, they don't go anywhere. They just come forth later in, more ugly or more damaging ways.
So I take it from what you've just said there, I take it, rather than then suppress your bit of your outlook or what your step with your clients and people, I take it from the reverse of that is to open up and talk.
As simple as that.
Yeah.
When we're born, we're only born with two fears: loud noises and a fear of falling. And every other fear that we have, whether it's the ones I mentioned earlier about my earlier days, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough, all of these kind of things, all stemming from my father not being in my life. All of those have been learned from experience. And, if you can talk yourself out of something, you can also talk yourself in.
Well, that's part and parcel of your, we both have a mutual NLP practitioners record in the back, and that is something about that self-belief and limiting beliefs is part of that, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I like NLP in the way that I do, because people talk about the eyes being a window to the soul, but the words are kind of a window to someone's mindset.
I love that. I love that as well, mate. There's some gems coming out of this. I love this, Dan. It's really good. I'm jotting them all down, mate. So I hope the audience are too. Yeah. So Titi, you mentioned coaching. So you came out the Marines, which again, congratulations, mate. I know how hard it is to get a green beret, right? My friends have done it. A couple of mates have done it. I know how hard it is. So congratulations with that. You came out and you mentioned about the coaching and more coaching. So obviously after that, you came into the coaching world. Can you talk to the audience about that?
So the reason I left the military was to kind of support my wife in what she was growing and building.
Yeah.
Two reasons actually. That my next assignment, because I'd done such a good job in Free Commando Brigade, the powers that be wanted to send me to Colchester to work with the parachute regiment.
When they say go into Colchester, not like the
Coventry, not the jail. Yeah, not sending me to jail, John. No, they were sending me to so the parachute regiment's version of the all arms commando course is called pre-para.
Right. Okay.
And I'm led to believe from some of my friends now that that's kind of evolved in a way it's delivered. But at the time, again, it was very much an elitist culture and one that wasn't providing what the military needed.
Yeah.
So kind of I was going to be posted to Colchester, which from South Wales, kind of M4, M25, A14, all that sort of stuff. It just the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Right. So I put my notice in, and I came to join my wife in her business. And, she's a true entrepreneur, loves sales, loves marketing. But at that time, her strengths, to be polite, weren't process and people. And that's what I'd learned in the military. To build in processes, to recognize, respect, and to give people the autonomy to do their job. So I joined my wife, kind of worked for around a year, delivered some key pieces of work that really stabilized the foundations of the business's growth. But I realized that, there was no sense of fulfillment for me. It felt like work, and coming from a military background where, every day felt like fun, it just didn't feel right. So kind of as a stopgap, I fell into fitness training, which was what my background was in the military, and created a business called Kickstart. And the idea was to bring people in that were kind of wanting to, complete charity events or Ironman triathlons,
happy days, mate.
Climb mountains, raise money for charity. And I was really fortunate, John. I worked with some great teams, raised, way over £50,000 for local charities in South Wales.
That's great stuff.
And one of the highlights of that for me was that for T Haven, actually, which is a hospice charity for terminally ill children in South Wales for those people.
Charity, mate.
Yeah. Well, we kind of done something that had never been done before, and I doubt it'll ever be done again. With a team of cyclists led by a guy called Dylan. We cycled from Cardiff to London to Edinburgh to Belfast to Dublin and back to Cardiff in 6 days.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah, it was a real feat of endurance. And
that's a mammoth one, mate. That's a mammoth one.
Yeah, and
how many miles was that?
I think it's around 1,000 miles in 6 days.
Yeah, it's big, mate. That I'm not going to blow, but I've done Land's End, John O'Groats. So I did that in 6 days. That was 850. So you topped that by at least a day's worth of cycling. So you must have been doing what, 200 a day? Well, 180 a day.
Yeah, and
that's big, mate. That is big start and big finish, because that's a hard challenge.
And the truth is, John, that we were going to stop in Dublin, but kind of when we got there, it didn't feel right. Looking at this map with like a section, our own section, north to South Wales, like, and seeing that hole in the circle. Yeah. So it was a group decision, and we decided to, very apt. We cracked on, and we got on our bikes, and we just got the job done back to down Cardiff Bay, outside the Millennium Centre, to a rapturous applause and a real sense of.
I bet. And you know what? There's so many lessons learned from those sort of journeys and trips, mate, aren't there? Yeah.
And that's kind of, and that was kind of, in a way, I was happy with what I was doing. I was earning good money, had low to no stress. Yeah. But kind of the realization that I went through after that Christmas day where I read that book, myself and my wife, we decided to not to try and fix our marriage, but just to build a new one, because the old one was gone. And a few months later, we went on holiday to the Maldives. And I'm an avid reader. I love, as part of my kind of routine is just creating a space in my life to either engage myself in some fiction or non-fiction or business or leadership books. Yeah. But at the time I was reading Legacy about, the All Blacks and what makes them so successful as a sporting team. And one
of my favorite books, mate. It's surprising you say that, because I've read it about 4 times. I absolutely, I share the same love as you with books. I absolutely love them, mate. So but carry on. I love it. Carry on.
Yeah, and essentially naively, we'd gone to the Maldives to kind of, patch up our marriage. It didn't happen in that way, but I was reading Legacy. A few sun lounges down, there's a guy that was he's similar to me. I would Steve Peters, and leans across and kind of jokes, saying, we must be the only guys in the Maldives reading self-help books. He's like, what's your story? And at the time, I was still had my mask on. I didn't feel safe to share who I am and kind of my story. So jokingly, I said, "Oh, you go first." So I ended up meeting this guy on the beach, a few minutes later, and sat there in this like white sand, sort of turquoise ocean. You could even see, John, like the black tip reef sharks swimming around the house reef.
Wow.
Just actually like everything you'd expect, from being in the Maldives.
Yeah.
And turns out this guy was an ex-Premiership footballer. I didn't recognize him, to be honest.
Yeah.
But he's an ex-Premiership footballer. He played for one of the big London clubs.
Right.
And he'd had 2 knee operations that hadn't worked. And, he'd gone from, earning, vast sums of money, from living in a penthouse apartment above the Thames, driving sports cars and, basically choosing which models he wanted to take to bed, that kind of stereotypical lifestyle. And then his story got interesting because his knee operations hadn't worked. He fell into a state of depression and addiction and gambling, and all of kind of the toxic vices you'd expect somebody to be able to indulge in with that level of income, and his life just spiraled down. And after telling me the story, which was full of pain and real adversity, he turned to me on this white sandy beach and said to me that the most profound words I'd ever heard in my life. And he said, the only difference between a grave and a rut is the depth. And, I don't remember even sharing with him the rest of my story. All I can kind of remember is walking back across the beach to Rachel, with these words like just kind of reverberating around my body. The only difference between a grave and a rut is the depth. And saying to Rachel, when we get home, I'm going to shut my business down. And, she fell asleep from Dubai back to Heathrow. I wrote an exit plan for my business, returned sums of money to clients, kind of, had a few courageous conversations with people that needed to perhaps, hear some home truths. And I took 8 months out. And in those 8 months, John, what became apparent, not just in my friendship group, but in my kind of business community that I was associated with, was that there's lots of guys out there that were kind of, essentially falling into the same traps that I had. They were prioritizing the wrong things. The diary was just full of work commitments. There was never any mental or physical space for their families and their children. And there's this realization that, much like there was when I was chosen or chose to work with Commando Forces, there's a realization there's a better way of doing this. There's a better way of, being a man that is successful. And, people talk about success leaving clues. Well, so does failure. And if you're idolizing, as the question you asked me earlier, or you're aspiring to be somebody that's in their 50s, that's wealthy, but they're unhappy, they're unhealthy, they're unfit, they're divorced, or they're disconnected from the children, or they lack a friendship group and they're lonely, kind of, what's the point of being successful if the consequences are so high?
I agree.
So that kind of led me to Better Men. I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to stand for something. And, I don't stand for kind of any sort of toxic masculinity. What I stand for is, and what Better Men stands for, is inviting, successful men into a space where they can become happy and fulfilled, in alignment with their career and business success.
Awesome. I love that. And just generally, how's it going, mate? How's it all going so far? I mean, I said to you offline that I've really enjoyed seeing the journey. You can see that you're on a journey. It's amazing to see. But yeah, how's it going? How's the business?
It felt like a risk, John, at first. It was kind of this unproven.
So I was going to ask that question first, actually. When you made that choice to go over, it must have felt like as though you were diving into the deep blue sea and not knowing whether you could swim.
It felt a lot like that. It felt a lot like that. But at the same time, I really had this sense of like inner conviction that, that my case wasn't isolated. Lots of the guys out there that have kind of fell into this myth of masculinity that, when you're successful, you'll be happy. And, lots of people define success around kind of, what they do in sense of the career and what their identity is. But it's very easy to overlook, a sense of happiness and connection and fulfillment. So, I had this kind of intrinsic belief that there was lots of other guys out there that, despite the technical success in terms of the income or the business success, that they were, disconnected, unhappy, unhealthy, feeling somewhat lonely. And, I started showing up on LinkedIn. started kind of, sharing some of my personal philosophy around masculinity and kind of the legacy that we're creating for the next generation of boys and men. And it started to resonate with people. So, I run a business, which is important to me. I want to make money. Money for me represents freedom for myself and my family. But really, having experienced what it's like for a marriage to separate and have children in the middle, and to kind of have my own poor mental health challenges, I don't want other men to fall into the same traps I did. And through facilitating the space where men feel safe to express how they think and how they feel, kind of reflect on the things that they've done and they're doing, kind of just allows guys to reframe and their perspective and definition of success, and to bring it into a sense of alignment. And that's kind of one of my own personal concepts, that when people are out of alignment in that their actions don't represent their thoughts, that you have these kind of feelings. And, as we spoke about before, if you try to suppress or reject those feelings, they just build up. And at some point, the lid will come off, and all the stuff you've been hiding for years will just come out. It'll be, a midlife crisis. It'll be a breakdown or a burnout, but it's going to happen. So my philosophy is that your actions represent your thoughts, so that you feel good about who you are, and where you're heading. And the way that happens is, it happens on a daily basis. Lots of people out there put too much emphasis, in my opinion, on the future, and they forget to live in the present. And provide the space for my clients, invite them to create a structure and a routine that works for them. Challenge them to become healthier, challenge them to become more connected to their wives and their friends and their partners, challenge them to really step into their business and show up to get the results that they want, and to recognize that the daily actions, the things that they do and don't do right now, are going to lead them down a path. And if they're not happy with the direction that they're going in, then the only time to change is now.
I love that. And I've got one question for you that is actually quite not personal, but I've got a friend that I just got someone in my life that I'd like to ask the question. If someone was sat there looking for purpose in their life, you talked about ruts. And you talk about getting themselves. I love that rut and the going deeper. I love that. But what about if someone's missing or lacking purpose in their life? What advice would you give that person? Is it what would you say to that person if they say, right, well, actually, I just lack purpose?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of these paradoxical kind of concepts, isn't it? That people think purpose is kind of something that's out there in the future that you need to build up to achieve. Where I try to invite my clients to recognize that purpose is in the everyday moments. That if you bring purpose to walking a dog, if you bring purpose to cutting the grass, if you bring purpose to engaging with your children, if you bring purpose to really achieving your quarterly targets in your business, you're going to feel a sense of purpose. And that purpose, John, it's not out there in the future, it's here every day for us. But if we choose to look past it because we're not happy with where we are, then start doing the things that make you happy. Start doing the things that you find a sense of purpose in. And the energy that you create is kind of, not only does it generate momentum for yourself in that you move forward almost effortlessly, but it's contagious. Other people pick up on your energy. I often see your LinkedIn posts, early in the morning. And, I don't know anybody else in the morning that's got your energy. And in fact, I know one other person. His name's Lee Evans. He's a good friend of mine. But that enthusiasm.
He's a good guy. He's a good guy.
Yeah,
not the comedian.
No.
No, Lee Evans, he's a great guy.
Fellow. Yeah. And, that comes from having a sense of purpose. It's either, I'm not saying that this is the case, John, but it's either a mask so that you can kind of deflect not having a sense of purpose, or it's a true sense of purpose and one that allows you to really add value to all the people that you interact with. So, awesome. Just to be really succinct here, if you think that purpose is like kind of a destination, you're going to be mistaken. You're going to spend years and perhaps decades of your life, kind of trying to chase something that doesn't exist. All you need to do is to bring your focus and your attention back to the present moment, not in a spiritual way or kind of a woo-woo way, but just, just start every day, do one thing that you find is meaningful and has a sense of purpose. After a week of that, try to do 2 things. After a week of that, do 3 things. And before you know it, you've filled your day with things that you find are full of purpose and intent. And it's a bit of a cliche, but passion's a great multiplier of potential. And when you go down this path, you find that your diary has less space for the urgent things, and it's just full of things that are important to you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, mate. And actually, it'll go a long way. It'll go a long way. I'm definitely gonna share that. Look, thanks ever so much. We're coming to the end. We're gonna do the last 3 questions now, Dan. So I'm gonna ask you to enter into Dan's world. What's the 3 non-negotiables?
3 non-negotiables.
So if I'm a client of yours, or I'm looking for a coach, I really want to work with you. What are the 3 non-negotiables you would say to that client?
Okay, so for my clients and those in my kind of friendship groups and wider community, you know, I'd start with keep your word.
Okay, I love that.
Keep your word. Be somebody that has integrity and speaks openly and courageously. Adopt or display an attitude of ownership. You know, one of the biggest things that I find difficult is to be around people that work from a victim mentality, in that everything is somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
You know, and probably lastly would be have a growth mindset. You know, be curious. You know, don't be so certain, because when you have a sense of certainty, you shut yourself off to possibilities and opportunities. But that's for other people, John. For myself, my 3 non-negotiables, ones that I try to live my life by, are all self-generated. So self-awareness.
Yeah.
You know, it was only the adversity of my daughter being born and kind of what that threw up for me that introduced me to who I was. And I didn't like, necessarily who I was. I don't blame myself, but my current thinking at that point in time, isn't a reflection of who I am today. And that's only come from self-awareness. So after that, be self-respect. Don't compromise your values. If you stand for everything, you stand for nothing.
Yeah.
So self-awareness, self-respect, and lastly, probably a concept of mine that I work with my clients and one that I try to embody every single day is self-leadership. Everybody wants to lead others. See lots of mission statements around the offices and premises of people's companies, but you don't see many people on a mission. Lots of mission statements, but not many people on a mission. And the way that you create your own mission is to demonstrate self-leadership. Influence and act in ways that are aligned with your values. Consciously choose to show up and be the best version of yourself.
Turn up. Love that. I love those 3. I think they're awesome. So next one, biggest life lesson so far for you?
Feel the fear and do it anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Most of my, 2 decades of my life, so many missed opportunities that, might have maybe put me on a very different path in life. I don't know. But because I was kind of, just paralyzed by fear of rejection and fear of failure, I never stepped across that line. And, that I've let go of a lot of those things now. But at the time when I learned and realized, because of my self-awareness that, I'd missed opportunities, I'd invite everybody to recognize that fear is a natural response, but that all it needs sometimes is either a little bit of knowledge or a little bit of action. And before you realize it, you're on the other side of the thing that you were once fearful of. And, you're glad that you stepped across the line.
Yeah. One day at a time, one step at a time, huh?
Yeah.
One step. Right. Last question for you, bud. So if you were to go back to a young Dan, and you saw him at 18, what sort of advice would you give him from where you are now?
Let people in.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably one of the common themes of my story has been kind of those first 35 years, particularly those 2 decades of kind of like leaving school and before my daughter was born, was that, I was kind of bit of a lone wolf, felt like I could do everything on my own. And that meant that actually I didn't connect to a lot of people. And by letting people in now, like I have done for the last 3 years, this Men and Mountains community that we've got of male walkers, mostly based in South Wales, there's a real sense of community in there and a lot of guys that I respect. I've let people in a way that I'm part of a men's group that we meet and we regularly kind of converse around life's challenges. I feel more connected to my childhood friends now. I've kind of invited them into a space where I am. around being more authentic, and that's all because I've let people in. If I would have done that as a young man or as an adolescent, I'm sure my life would have had a lot of richer connections.
Yeah, mate, they're awesome. I've loved my time. Right, one last thing for you then. How do people reach out to you? They've sat there, listened to us both. They've really inspired by what you said. How do they reach out to Dan?
Thank you, John. Yeah. My main social media channel is LinkedIn. Dan Stanley, Better Men Coaching. So people connect me on LinkedIn, send me a message, have a conversation, or if people aren't necessarily looking for necessarily coaching support, the Men and Mountains community that I kind of facilitate is just a group of like-minded men that despite being busy, choose to prioritize just one day a month to come together to have a walk and a talk, usually in the Brecon Beacons. So look me up under Dan Stanley on LinkedIn, or send me a message in relation to Men and Mountains.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Look, I'm so thankful for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed today, and I can't wait to show this to everyone. So, Dan, thanks ever so much, mate. Have a great day, and crack on.
Yeah, you too, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries, mate. I'll catch you soon. Cheers, Dan.
Bye-bye.
So there we have it. Dan Stanley. Loved his honesty. Loved his journey. Loved his story. And again, authenticity is key. You can see they're working with Dan and what he's done and how he's doing it. He's on a journey. I've watched his journey over the last 3 to 5 years, and it's an exciting one. Really nice guy, gentleman, always punctual, on point with lots of things. Some of the gems out of that was brilliant. I just thought so many to even mention. The purpose every day. Take that step every day. Be the best person you can be. Lots of resonating points within everyone I'm meeting at the moment, and every podcast sort of says the same. Be a better person, and it's not about that end goal that you can get in a few years. It's about being better every day, every hour, and I loved it. I hope you did too. Like it, thumbs up, give me some feedback. On to the next one. On to near enough to episode 3, which is unbelievable. So, hey, enjoy. Hope you got some real value from that. And as I say, crack on. Crack on.